My son called his wife's mother the real family until Christmas night, when the truth cost him $197,000. The words landed like a slap, sharper than I ever expected on Christmas Eve, no less. I never thought I'd live to hear my own child dismiss me like yesterday's newspaper. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Most days, my routine felt like treading water in a storm off the Brooklyn waterfront. I'd wake up in my tiny one-bedroom apartment on Ocean Avenue, the familiar smell of stale coffee and old newspaper clippings greeting me like unwelcome visitors. The radiator clanged against the winter cold, a metallic symphony that had become the soundtrack of my loneliness. Every morning began the same way, peeling open the fridge door, hoping for something fresh, but only finding the neglect I'd grown accustomed to serving myself. I remember standing there in my worn blue bathrobe, the one my grandson had given me 3 Christmases ago, when things were different. The fabric had faded, but I kept wearing it because it still held the memory of his small arms wrapped around my waist, his voice whispering, "I love you, Grandma Margaret." Now that bathrobe felt more like a shroud than comfort. The apartment walls were covered with family photos from better times. Pictures of my son David as a little boy, missing his front teeth, grinning at me from our old stoop in Park Slope. Photos of his wedding day 8 years ago, when I still believed I was gaining a daughter, not losing my son. My daughter-in-law Rebecca looked radiant in white, and I remembered thinking how lucky David was to find someone who could make him smile like that. How naive I was. Just last week, I had mustered the courage to send David a simple text message. My arthritic fingers struggled with the tiny phone buttons as I typed, "Would you like to come for dinner this Sunday? I could make your favorite pot roast." I stared at that message for 10 minutes before pressing send, my heart hammering like it did when I was 16 and calling boys for the first time. No reply, no call back. The silence stretched for days until it felt like a canyon between us. This wasn't the first time. Over the past year, my attempts to connect had been met with an increasingly cold wall of indifference. Birthday invitations ignored, holiday plans made without consulting me. Emergency room visits I learned about through neighbors, not family. In my mind, I replayed whispers of my grandson Tommy's laughter from years ago, back when I was still invited to soccer games and school plays. I could almost smell Rebecca's perfume from the days when she'd hug me at family gatherings, before her smiles turned brittle and her conversations became exercises in polite dismissal. But what hurt most was remembering David as a little boy, how he used to climb into my lap after thunderstorms, pressing his face against my chest while I hummed old lullabies. "Mama," he'd whisper, "you make everything safe." Now I couldn't even make him answer my phone calls. The apartment felt smaller every day, like the walls were closing in with each unanswered message, each declined invitation. I'd find myself talking to the photographs, having conversations with the ghosts of who we used to be. Where did I go wrong? I'd ask David's kindergarten picture. What did I do to deserve this? The answer came in fragments, scattered across months of small cruelties and growing distance. It started 3 years ago, when Rebecca's mother, Eleanor, moved closer to them in Bay Ridge. Suddenly, family dinners happened at Eleanor's house. Birthday parties were planned around Eleanor's schedule. When little Tommy scraped his knee, it was Eleanor who got the emergency calls, not me. "Rebecca's mom understands kids better," David had explained one afternoon when I questioned why I wasn't included in Tommy's parent-teacher conference. "She raised 4 kids. You only had me, only had him," as if loving one child completely was somehow less valuable than spreading that love thinner across 4. I had offered everything to keep this family together. Everything. When David graduated from Brooklyn College, I had cashed in my retirement savings to pay for his final year of tuition, $27,000 from what was supposed to be my security blanket, gone in one generous gesture because I believed in his dreams of becoming a financial advisor. When Rebecca got pregnant with Tommy, I drove them to countless doctor's appointments in my old Honda Civic, the one that rattled and wheezed but still got them where they needed to go. I sat in waiting rooms for hours, knitting tiny sweaters and dreaming of the grandmother I would become. When they bought their first house in Sheepshead Bay, I had co-signed the mortgage because their credit wasn't quite good enough on its own. My name on those papers felt like a promise. We were in this together, building something lasting. I remember the night Rebecca went into labor with Tommy. David called me at 2 in the morning, his voice shaking with excitement and terror. "Mom, it's time. Can you meet us at the hospital?" I threw on clothes and drove through empty Brooklyn streets, my heart singing with anticipation. I was going to be a grandmother. I was going to matter in this new little life. For the first 2 years, I did matter. I babysat Tommy every Tuesday and Thursday while Rebecca worked her part-time job at the dental office. I changed diapers, prepared bottles, sang the same lullabies I'd sung to David. Tommy's first word wasn't mama or dada, it was Nana, and my heart nearly exploded with joy. But then Eleanor moved from Buffalo to Brooklyn, just to be closer to the grandchildren, she announced, as if I didn't exist. Eleanor, with her perfectly coiffed white hair and her endless supply of money from her late husband's insurance business. Eleanor, who could afford expensive gifts and elaborate birthday parties and trips to Disney World. The Tuesday and Thursday babysitting sessions gradually became optional. "Eleanor can watch Tommy today," Rebecca would say. "She loves spending time with him." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor was better at this grandmother thing than I was. Holiday traditions I had carefully built over decades were casually discarded. For 32 years, I had hosted Christmas Eve dinner in my apartment. My dining table might have been small, but I somehow made room for everyone. I'd spend days preparing David's favorite dishes, my mother's recipe for beef brisket, homemade apple pie with extra cinnamon, the sugar cookies we used to decorate together when he was small. But 3 years ago, Christmas Eve moved to Eleanor's house in Bay Ridge. "She has more space, Mom," David explained over the phone, his voice carrying an apology that somehow made the rejection worse. "And the baby will be more comfortable there." Eleanor's house was bigger, that was true. Her dining room could seat 12 people easily. Her kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that made my old apartment look like a relic from another century. But what stung most was that my traditions, my memories, my decades of love were apparently not worth preserving if someone else had a bigger refrigerator. I swallowed the hurt and went along. What choice did I have? If I protested, I'd be labeled difficult, jealous, the bitter mother-in-law who couldn't let go. So I showed up at Eleanor's pristine house with my humble contributions. A simple side dish, a small gift for Tommy, and tried to find my place in someone else's celebration of my family's holiday. The conversations at Eleanor's table revolved around her stories, her advice, her opinions on everything from child-rearing to politics. I sat quietly, nodding appropriately, feeling more like a distant relative than Tommy's other grandmother. Eleanor would regale everyone with tales of her successful children, her wise investments, her philanthropic activities in her old neighborhood. "When my Rebecca was Tommy's age," she'd begin, and I'd brace myself for another story that somehow managed to make my own experiences seem inadequate. Eleanor always knew better. She had better methods for everything: sleep training, potty training, discipline, nutrition. My old-fashioned approaches were gently but consistently undermined. The manipulation was subtle at first, sharp words hidden behind forced smiles and concerned expressions. "Margaret, dear," Eleanor would say in her honey-sweet voice, "maybe Mom should stay home instead of coming to the playground. Tommy seems to get confused when too many adults are giving him directions." I'd look to David for support, but he'd avoid my eyes, already trained to take Eleanor's side in these gentle power struggles. "I just want what's best for Tommy," I'd say, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. His silence became my answer. The financial manipulation started slowly, almost imperceptibly. David began asking for loans with increasing frequency. "Just until the next commission check comes in, Mom. You know how the real estate market is. 500 here, 1,000 there." Sometimes the money got paid back, sometimes it didn't. I kept track at first, but eventually gave up when the numbers became too depressing to acknowledge. When David asked for help with Tommy's preschool tuition, I didn't hesitate. $8,000 from my modest savings account, because I believed education was the most important gift I could give my grandson. When they needed a car repair, I covered it. When Rebecca needed dental work, I helped with that too. "You're so generous, Margaret," Eleanor would coo when she heard about my latest contribution. But there was something cold in her eyes, something calculating. I began to suspect that these financial requests weren't entirely David and Rebecca's idea. The worst part wasn't the money itself. I had lived frugally for decades and had some sums set aside from my years working as a school secretary. What broke my heart was the gradual realization that my value to this family had become purely monetary. I wasn't invited for my wisdom, my love, or my company. I was tolerated because I was useful. I was the bank that never said no, the grandmother who could be counted on to subsidize their lifestyle without asking uncomfortable questions. One particularly painful Christmas, I discovered something that shattered the last of my illusions. I had been organizing my financial papers for tax season when I found bank statements showing $50,000 in withdrawals over the past year. $50,000. Money I had given to David and Rebecca for various emergencies and needs. Money I had scraped together from my retirement savings and my mother's modest inheritance. But when I carefully traced where that money had gone, the truth was like a knife through my chest. Instead of the emergencies they had described, the money had been used to renovate Eleanor's kitchen in Bay Ridge. New cabinets, new appliances, new flooring. A complete makeover that cost exactly what I had given them. I sat at my small kitchen table, surrounded by bank statements and receipts, trying to make sense of the betrayal. They had lied to me, systematically, repeatedly, callously lied to me. While I was eating canned soup and wearing the same winter coat for the third year, my money was being used to make Eleanor's house more beautiful for family gatherings I barely felt welcome at. The revelation was devastating, but what made it worse was my own complicity. I had been so desperate to maintain my connection to this family that I had allowed myself to be used. I had confused being needed with being loved. I had mistaken financial dependency for familial bond. That night, I called David, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. "David, honey, I need to talk to you about something. Mom, I'm really busy right now. Can this wait?" "No, it can't wait. I found out where the money I've been giving you has really been going." There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was defensive, almost hostile. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Eleanor's kitchen renovation, David. All of it. The money I gave you for Tommy's medical expenses, for the car repair, for Rebecca's dental work, it all went to renovating Eleanor's house." Another pause. Then, in a voice I barely recognized as my son's, "Mom, life is complicated. You don't understand all the pressures we're dealing with. Eleanor needed help, and she's been so good to us. She deserved to have a nice space for when the family comes over. And I don't deserve honesty from my own son. It's not that simple, Mom. You're making this about you when it's about what's best for everyone." I hung up feeling smaller than I had in years. My own son had just explained to me why lying to me was justified, why stealing from me was reasonable, why I should be grateful that my money had bought someone else's happiness. But the worst was yet to come. Birthdays began passing without acknowledgement. My 70th birthday arrived and departed with nothing. No call, no card, no visit. I sat in my apartment that evening, looking at a small birthday cake I had bought for myself, and wondered when I had become so invisible to the people I loved most. When I caught the flu that winter, the coughing in my cold apartment echoed with loneliness. I was sick for 2 weeks, barely able to get out of bed, surviving on crackers and weak tea because I was too exhausted to shop for groceries. My phone never rang. No one checked on me. For all they knew, I could have been dead. I remember lying in bed one particularly bad night, my fever spiking and my body aching, wondering if anyone would even notice if I didn't answer my phone for a few days. The thought terrified me because I realized the answer was probably no. I had become so peripheral to their lives that my absence might not even register. When I finally recovered enough to venture outside, I ran into Rosa Martinez, my neighbor from 3 floors down. Rosa took one look at me and gasped. "Margaret, honey, you look terrible. Have you been sick?" I burst into tears right there in the hallway, months of accumulated hurt pouring out in ugly sobs. Rosa didn't hesitate. She took my arm and guided me into her warm apartment, where she made me soup and listened to my story without judgment. "Where's your family?" she asked gently. "I don't think I have one anymore." I whispered. Rosa held my hand while I cried, and for the first time in months, I felt human again. Her simple kindness reminded me what care looked like, what it felt like to matter to another person. Meanwhile, the financial demands from David continued. Credit card bills that needed paying, unexpected expenses that required immediate help. Each request came with elaborate explanations about why this particular crisis couldn't wait, why I was the only one who could solve their problem. I found myself dreading my phone, knowing that "Hi, Mom" had become code for "I need money." Conversations with David became transactions. He'd call with forced cheerfulness, ask about my health in perfunctory tones, then transition smoothly into whatever financial assistance he required this time. "You know, we wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate, Mom," became his standard script. "You know how much we appreciate everything you do for us." But appreciation never translated into inclusion. The money flowed one direction, but the love and respect I craved remained elusive. I was funding a family life I wasn't invited to participate in, subsidizing gatherings I wasn't welcome at, paying for experiences I'd never share. One bitter December day, almost exactly a year after the kitchen renovation revelation, I made a discovery that would change everything. I had been cleaning out my email inbox when I found something I had missed months earlier. An email thread accidentally forwarded to me instead of to Rebecca. The emails were between Eleanor and Rebecca, discussing something called a trust fund redirection. My hands trembled as I read Eleanor's words. "I've convinced David that it makes more sense for the trust fund to be managed through my accounts. Margaret won't understand the complexities of investment strategy, and this way we can ensure the money is properly handled for Tommy's future." Rebecca's response was equally chilling. "David feels guilty about it. But you're right. Mom doesn't need to be involved in these kinds of financial decisions. She's too emotional about money. Too emotional about money. My money. Money I had set aside specifically for Tommy's education. Money that was supposed to be held in trust for my grandson's future. They had rerouted it into Eleanor's control without my knowledge or consent. The betrayal hit me like ice water over my head. This wasn't just theft. It was a systematic campaign to erase me from my own family's financial life. Eleanor had positioned herself as the competent matriarch, while painting me as an incompetent old woman who couldn't be trusted with important decisions. I sat at my computer, reading and rereading those emails, the magnitude of the deception washing over me in waves. This was why David had been so vague about Tommy's college fund. This was why conversations about financial planning always got redirected or postponed. They had already decided I was irrelevant to my grandson's future. The worst part was that David had gone along with it. My son, the boy I had raised alone after his father left, the child I had sacrificed everything for, had allowed another woman to convince him that his own mother couldn't be trusted. I printed out those emails with shaking hands, my chest tight with a pain that went beyond heartbreak. This was evidence of a betrayal so complete, so calculated, that it felt like discovering a murder plot. They had killed my role in this family systematically, deliberately, while smiling to my face and accepting my gifts. That night I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, surrounded by photos of the family that had erased me, and felt something break inside my chest. Not just my heart, something deeper. The trust that had been the foundation of my relationship with my son, the belief that love could survive anything, the hope that being a mother meant something permanent and unshakable. I found myself holding a chipped teacup, the last one from a set my mother had given me for my wedding. Without thinking, I squeezed it until it crumbled in my hands, pieces of porcelain falling to the floor like fragments of my shattered faith in family. For the first time in my life, I contemplated the unthinkable, saying no, not just to a financial request, but to all of it. To the manipulation, the lies, the casual cruelty disguised as family dynamics. The thought buzzed in my head like a restless wasp. Could I actually do it? Could I stop trying to buy love that was never for sale? The fear of loneliness battled with my desperate need for dignity. Was it better to be used than to be completely alone? Was a hollow relationship better than no relationship at all? I had spent so many years accepting crumbs of affection that I had forgotten what it felt like to be truly loved, truly valued. But that night, something changed. Maybe it was Rosa's kindness showing me what genuine care looked like. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of too many humiliations. Maybe it was just exhaustion from carrying one-sided love for so long. I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out a leather box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were photos from when David was small. Pictures from birthday parties where I was the center of his world, Christmas mornings when his face lit up at gifts I had saved for months to afford, school events where he looked for me in the audience with absolute confidence that I would be there. Looking at those photos, I remembered who I used to be. Not just David's mother, but Margaret Walsh, a woman with her own dreams and dignity. I had been someone once, before I became a walking ATM for an ungrateful family. That night, I made a decision that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I packed away all the family photos from the living room, storing them in boxes like memories of people who had died. Because in a way, they had. The family I thought I belonged to had never really existed. I had been loving ghosts, chasing shadows, feeding vultures who saw my devotion as weakness. I sat in front of my cracked hallway mirror, tracing the lines that grief and stress had carved into my face. "Margaret," I whispered to my reflection, "it's time to stop begging for love from people who don't want to give it." The woman looking back at me was 70 years old, but her eyes held a spark I hadn't seen in years. Not the desperate hope I'd been carrying, but something harder and cleaner. Resolution. For the first time in decades, I was going to choose myself. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Not better exactly, but stronger. The apartment felt less like a prison and more like a starting point. I made coffee in my chipped mug, ate toast without checking my phone for messages that wouldn't come, and began planning the most difficult conversation of my life. It was time to confront David, not as a desperate mother begging for scraps of attention, but as a woman who had finally remembered her own worth. The thought terrified me, but it also filled me with something I hadn't felt in years: anticipation. I was about to discover who I could be when I stopped trying to be what everyone else wanted. I called David that afternoon, my voice steadier than it had been in months. "David, I need to see you. In person. Tonight." "Mom, I told you I'm really busy these days. Can't we just talk on the phone?" "No, we cannot just talk on the phone. I'm coming over at 7 o'clock. Be there." I hung up before he could argue, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. After decades of accommodating everyone else's schedule, I was finally setting my own. The drive to David's house in Sheepshead Bay felt like traveling through time. Every familiar street corner held memories of the mother I used to be, the grandmother I thought I would become. But tonight, I wasn't coming as a supplicant. I was coming as an equal, demanding the respect I should have commanded all along. David opened the door with a wary expression, like he was greeting a stranger rather than his mother. "Mom, what's this about?" "Rebecca's out with her mother, and Tommy's doing homework." "It's about the trust fund, David. It's about the lies, the manipulation, and the systematic way you and Eleanor have erased me from this family while taking my money." His face went white. "Mom, I don't know what you think you know, but I know everything, David. I have the emails. I have the bank records. I know exactly where my money went, and exactly how you all discussed cutting me out of decisions about my own grandson's future." We stood in his hallway, the little boy I had raised now looking like a cornered animal. "It's not what you think, Mom. Eleanor was just trying to help. She has experience with investments, and you thought I was too stupid and too emotional to handle my own money. You thought you could lie to me indefinitely while using me as your personal bank account. You thought I would never find out because I'm just a foolish old woman who doesn't understand complex financial matters." David's defense crumbled into denial tinged with emotional manipulation. "Mom, you're blowing this way out of proportion. We never meant to hurt you. Your family. We love you." "Love?" The word came out harsh and bitter. "You love my checkbook, David. You love my desperation to stay connected to Tommy. You love how easy I am to manipulate. But you don't love me." I could see him scrambling for the right words, the explanation that would somehow make this okay. "That's not true, Mom. You know that's not true. Eleanor has been through this before with her other grandchildren. She knows how to handle these things." The only thing Eleanor knows how to handle is how to steal from a lonely old woman while convincing her son to be an accomplice. The words hung between us like a bridge on fire. I watched my son's face cycle through emotions: guilt, anger, defensiveness, fear. But what I didn't see was remorse. What I didn't see was the love he claimed to feel. Mom, you're being really unfair right now. We're dealing with a lot of pressure, and Eleanor has been incredibly helpful. Maybe you should try to understand her position instead of making this all about you, making this all about me, my own money, my own grandson's future, my own exclusion from family decisions. And I was making it all about me. That's when I knew for certain that the boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man who could look his mother in the eye and tell her that objecting to being stolen from was selfish. I'm done, David. What does that mean? It means no more money. It means no more lies. It means you get to choose between treating me with respect or losing me entirely. I turned to leave, but David grabbed my arm. Mom, wait. Let's talk about this. You're upset, and I get that, but we can work this out. I looked down at his hand on my arm, and for a moment, I saw him as the frightened little boy who used to need me to chase away nightmares. But that little boy had grown into a man who created nightmares for his own mother. Let go of me, David. He did, stepping back like I had slapped him. Mom, please, don't leave like this. I'm not leaving like anything. I'm leaving because I finally understand what I mean to this family, and I'm tired of pretending that's enough. I walked out of that house with my head high for the first time in years, but my heart was breaking in ways I didn't know were possible. I had just chosen dignity over family, self-respect over belonging. The most terrifying and necessary decision of my life. The drive home was a blur of tears and something that might have been relief. I had finally said the words that had been burning in my chest for years. I had finally chosen myself, but the cost felt astronomical. I had likely just lost my son and grandson forever. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. Not the sleep of peace, but the sleep of exhaustion after a battle. I had fought for my worth and won. But the victory felt hollow when the prize was solitude. The next few days passed in an eerie calm. My phone didn't ring, which was somehow both disappointing and liberating. No financial requests, no guilt-laden conversations, no walking on eggshells to avoid offending people who had no qualms about offending me. But then Rebecca called. Margaret, I think we need to talk. Her voice was cold, professional, like she was calling to discuss a business transaction rather than a family crisis. I'm listening, Rebecca. David told me about your conversation. I think you're being really unfair. Eleanor has done nothing but try to help this family, and you're treating her like she's some kind of criminal. I almost laughed. After everything that had happened, Rebecca was calling to defend Eleanor. Rebecca, Eleanor convinced you to steal from me. She orchestrated my exclusion from decisions about my own grandson's future. What exactly am I being unfair about? That's not how it happened, Margaret. Eleanor has experience managing money, and we thought it would be better if someone who understands investments was handling Tommy's college fund. We were protecting your interests, protecting my interests by lying to me and cutting me out of decisions. The gaslighting was so complete, so confident, that for a moment I almost doubted my own perception of reality. Where did the $50,000 go, Rebecca? The money I gave you for emergencies and medical bills and car repairs? There was a long pause. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was defensive. Eleanor needed help with her house, and she's been so generous with us. We thought you'd understand if you knew how much she's done for our family. She's done for your family. I didn't realize I wasn't part of that anymore. You are part of this family, Margaret, but so is Eleanor. And honestly, sometimes it feels like you're jealous of the relationship she has with Tommy. Jealous? Of course. The classic deflection. When caught stealing from someone, accuse them of being envious of the thief. I'm not jealous, Rebecca. I'm heartbroken. There's a difference. Well, maybe if you made more of an effort to get along with Eleanor instead of seeing everything as a competition, we could all move forward. I hung up on her, not in anger, but in recognition. This conversation was pointless. Rebecca had drunk so deeply from Eleanor's manipulation that she genuinely believed I was the problem. In their narrative, I was the difficult mother-in-law who couldn't accept being gracefully pushed aside, but something had changed in me during that phone call. Instead of the crushing despair I expected to feel, I felt cleaner, lighter. These people had revealed themselves completely, and I finally saw them clearly. They weren't my family anymore. They were strangers wearing the faces of people I used to love. Over the next few days, I began the practical work of reclaiming my life. I called Rosa and asked for the name of the lawyer she had mentioned once. I made an appointment for the following week. I closed the joint bank account I shared with David and opened a new one in my name only. Each step felt like shedding old skin, painful but necessary. I was learning how to be Margaret Walsh again instead of David's mother, Tommy's other grandmother, the family ATM with legs. Rosa invited me for dinner that Friday, and I accepted. Her small apartment was warm and lived in, full of photographs and plants and evidence of a life fully lived. We ate simple food, rice and beans and roasted chicken, and talked about everything except my family crisis. For 2 hours, I remembered what normal conversation felt like, what it felt like to be valued for my company rather than my bank account. "You look different," Rosa observed over coffee. "Sad, but different. Stronger, maybe?" "I feel like I'm shedding a skin I've been wearing for too long," I admitted. "It hurts, but it also feels clean." Rosa nodded knowingly. Sometimes love becomes poison when it's not returned in kind. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop drinking poison and calling it medicine. Her words stayed with me as I walked back to my apartment. Love had become poison. I had been so desperate to maintain connections that I had allowed those connections to slowly kill my spirit, my dignity, my sense of self, but no more. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and old books, serious and official in a way that made my mission feel real. Maria Santos was a woman about my age, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened to my story without judgment, taking notes and asking practical questions. "You have grounds for several legal actions," she said when I finished. "The trust fund manipulation is definitely actionable. Do you want to pursue criminal charges?" The question surprised me. I had come seeking to protect myself, not to punish anyone else. "I don't want to destroy them," I said slowly. "I just want my money back and some legal protection going forward. We can absolutely do that. But Margaret, I need you to understand something. Once you take these steps, your relationship with your family will probably change permanently. They may see this as an act of war rather than an act of self-protection." I thought about that for a long moment. The family relationship she was talking about was already dead. I just hadn't been ready to acknowledge the funeral. What I was doing wasn't destroying something real. I was refusing to keep pretending something false was acceptable. "I understand," I told her. "Proceed with whatever paperwork is necessary." That night, I called David. Not to argue or explain, but to inform him of what was happening. He deserved that much warning, even if he hadn't extended me the same courtesy when he was stealing from me. "David, I wanted you to know that I've hired a lawyer. I'm taking legal action to recover the trust fund money and to prevent any future access to my finances." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I wondered if he had hung up. Finally, "Mom, please don't do this. We can work this out as a family." "We're not working as a family, David. We're working as predator and prey. I'm done being prey." "You're really going to destroy this family over money?" The question was so backwards, so completely inverted from reality, that I actually laughed. "I'm not destroying anything, son. I'm stopping you from continuing to destroy me." Another long pause. Then, in a voice I had never heard from him before, cold and calculating, "If you do this, Mom, there's no going back. You'll lose Tommy. You'll lose all of us." The threat was what I had been expecting, but it still felt like a punch to the stomach. "I've already lost all of you, David. I just wasn't ready to admit it." I hung up and immediately called Maria to tell her about the conversation. She made notes and assured me that threatening to withhold access to grandchildren was actually evidence of psychological manipulation that would strengthen our case. The paperwork was filed on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, my phone was ringing constantly. David, Rebecca, and even Eleanor trying to reach me. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to discuss. But on Saturday morning, something unexpected happened. Tommy called. "Grandma Margaret? It's Tommy. Dad said you're mad at us." My heart clenched at the sound of his voice. At 12 years old, he was caught in the middle of adult conflicts he couldn't understand. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm not mad at you. I could never be mad at you. But Dad says you don't want to see us anymore because of some fight about money." I closed my eyes, wondering how to explain complex adult betrayals to a child who still believed families were supposed to love each other. "Tommy, do you remember when you were little and you used to come stay with me?" "Yeah. We'd watch movies and you'd make those cookies with the chocolate chips." "That's right. And do you remember how I used to tell you that people should treat each other with kindness and honesty?" "Uh-huh. Well, some of the adults in our family haven't been treating me with kindness and honesty. And sometimes, when that happens, grown-ups have to make hard decisions to protect themselves. But you're still my grandma, right?" The question broke something open in my chest. "I will always, always be your grandma, Tommy. No matter what happens with the other adults, that will never change. Can I still call you sometimes? Even if Dad says I can't come visit?" I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. This child, in his innocence, had just offered me more genuine affection than his father had shown me in years. "You can call me whenever you want, sweetheart. I will always want to hear from you." After we hung up, I sat in my living room and wept. Not the bitter tears of betrayal I had been crying for months, but something cleaner. I was mourning the family I had lost, but I was also celebrating the connection I had just preserved. Whatever happened with David and Rebecca, Tommy and I had something real. Christmas was approaching, and for the first time in decades, I had no family plans. The thought should have been devastating, but instead, it felt like freedom. I wouldn't have to navigate Eleanor's passive aggression or pretend to be grateful for being included in celebrations at someone else's house. Rosa invited me to spend Christmas Eve with her extended family, and I accepted. Her daughter and grandchildren welcomed me warmly, treating me like an old family friend rather than a charity case. We ate traditional dishes I had never tried and told stories and laughed until my cheeks hurt. It was the first Christmas in years where I felt genuinely welcome, genuinely valued for my presence rather than my presence. But just when I thought the worst of the family drama was over, David delivered one final blow. He called me on Christmas morning with what he claimed was an olive branch. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything that's happened. Maybe we can find a way to work this out. Can you come over tonight? Rebecca's cooking dinner, and Tommy really wants to see you." Against my better judgment, against Maria's advice, I agreed. Some part of me still hoped that Christmas magic could heal what felt beyond repair. I should have known better. Christmas night arrived cold and bitter, snow beginning to fall as I drove through Brooklyn streets toward a confrontation I didn't see coming. David's house was warm and bright, decorated with lights and garland that should have felt welcoming. Instead, the festive atmosphere felt like a stage set for a performance I hadn't been given the script for. The entire family was gathered around the kitchen table when I arrived. David, Rebecca, Tommy, and of course, Eleanor. The seating arrangement told me everything I needed to know. Eleanor at the head of the table like a matriarch, Rebecca and David flanking her like loyal subjects. Tommy squeezed into the remaining space. A single chair had been added at the far end, obviously meant for me, positioned like an afterthought. "Margaret, so glad you could join us," Eleanor said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "We were just discussing family traditions and how important it is to keep everyone together." I took my assigned seat, feeling like I was entering a trap but not yet understanding its design. "Thank you for including me, Eleanor." The dinner conversation was carefully orchestrated, flowing around topics that somehow always circled back to Eleanor's wisdom, Eleanor's experience, Eleanor's valuable contributions to the family. Rebecca hung on her every word like a devoted daughter, while David nodded approvingly at his mother-in-law's opinions. I tried to engage Tommy in conversation about school, his friends, his interests, but every attempt was subtly redirected by the adults. It was like being in a play where everyone else knew their lines and I was improvising badly. Finally, after the main course was cleared, David stood up with a glass of wine and cleared his throat. "I want to make a toast," he announced, "to family, and to the people who really understand what family means." He raised his glass toward Eleanor. To Eleanor, who has shown us what real family commitment looks like, who puts family first always, who sacrifices for the people she loves without keeping score, who understands that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when it matters. The words hit me like slaps. Each phrase was clearly directed at me. Each compliment to Eleanor was an implicit criticism of my perceived failures as a family member. But then David said the words that would haunt me forever. Eleanor, you've become the real family to us. The mother and grandmother who truly understands what love means. The real family. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I felt the room spinning, felt my chest tightening, felt decades of love and sacrifice being dismissed with a single casual sentence. My son, the boy I had raised alone, had just declared that another woman was his real mother in front of me. David, I said quietly, what did you just say? He looked at me with cold eyes, and I realized this entire evening had been planned. This wasn't a reconciliation dinner. It was an execution. I said Eleanor understands what real family means, Mom. She doesn't threaten to destroy families over money. She doesn't hire lawyers to attack the people who love her. Rebecca jumped in with her support. Eleanor has been nothing but generous and loving, Margaret. She's treated David and Tommy like her own family from day one. Maybe if you tried to learn from her example instead of seeing her as competition. I looked around the table at these people I had loved, sacrificed for, believed in. Even Tommy was staring at his plate, clearly uncomfortable but unable to defend me against the united front of adults. And that's when I saw it. Sitting on the sideboard behind Eleanor, a framed photograph from Tommy's birthday party 2 years ago, the party I had paid for but hadn't been invited to help plan. In the photo, Eleanor was cutting the cake while Tommy grinned beside her, the picture of a doting grandmother with her beloved grandchild. But I wasn't in the photo. Not because I hadn't been there. I remembered taking dozens of pictures that day, remembered helping to serve cake and clean up afterward. I had been deliberately cropped out, edited away, erased from the visual record of my grandson's celebration. The photo was sitting in a place where I couldn't miss it, displayed like evidence of my irrelevance. That's when something inside me snapped. I stood up slowly, walked to the sideboard, and picked up the framed photograph. For a moment, I just stared at it, seeing clearly for the first time how systematically I had been erased from this family's story. This is interesting, I said quietly. I remember this party. I remember paying for it, helping to organize it, spending hours wrapping presents and decorating. But somehow, I'm not in this picture. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably. Margaret, dear, I'm sure that was just... No. My voice was stronger now, cutting through her attempt at explanation. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. You've been systematically erasing me from this family while taking my money and my love and giving nothing back but humiliation. I looked directly at David. You want to know what real family means, son? Real family doesn't steal from each other. Real family doesn't lie and manipulate and gaslight. Real family doesn't erase people from photographs and then display those photos like trophies. I lifted the photograph and very deliberately tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper was loud in the suddenly silent room. I let the pieces fall to the floor like confetti at a funeral. Real family doesn't declare other people to be the real family, while the person who actually raised you is sitting right there. David's face went white, then red. Mom, what are you doing? I reached into my purse and pulled out a small key, the key to the safe deposit box where I kept important documents and some emergency cash. For months, David had been asking about that key, wanting to know what was in the box, suggesting it might be safer if he had access, in case of emergency. I held the key up so everyone could see it, then closed my fist around it. This is the key you've been wanting, David. The key to what's left of my financial security after you and Eleanor picked my accounts clean. Well, here's some news for you. You'll never see this key again. I put the key back in my purse and zipped it shut with theatrical finality. And here's some more news. As of tomorrow morning, I'm changing my will. Any inheritance you thought you might receive from the mother you just rejected in favor of someone else's generosity? Gone. The silence in the room was deafening. I could see the calculation in David's eyes. the sudden understanding that his little Christmas performance had just cost him significantly more than he had anticipated. "Mom, you can't be serious," Rebecca finally whispered. "Over one comment?" "Over one comment?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Over years of lies, manipulation, theft, and systematic emotional abuse. Over being erased from family photos and family decisions while being treated like an ATM with legs. Over my son telling me to my face that another woman is his real family. I looked at each of them in turn, memorizing their faces, saying goodbye to the people I thought they were. "You want Eleanor to be your real family? Perfect. She can support you financially. She can pay for Tommy's college. She can be your emergency fund and your retirement plan and your source of unconditional love and forgiveness. I'm done applying for a job that was never really available. Margaret, please." Eleanor spoke up, her voice shakier than I had ever heard it. "This is all a misunderstanding. We never meant—" "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You meant every bit of it. You meant to steal my money, erase my role, and replace me in my own family. The only thing you didn't mean to do was get caught." I turned to Tommy, my heart breaking at the confusion and fear in his young eyes. "Tommy, I want you to remember that I love you, no matter what anyone tells you about tonight, no matter what stories they create to explain what happened here. I want you to know that I will always love you, and if you ever need me, you know how to find me." I kissed the top of his head despite Rebecca's obvious displeasure, then walked toward the door. David followed me, his earlier confidence replaced by something that might have been panic. "Mom, wait. Let's talk about this. You're upset, and I get that, but let's be reasonable. We're family. We can work this out." I turned to face him one last time. "This man who used to be my little boy. Respect me or lose me, David. Those are your choices. I will no longer buy love from people who don't want to give it. And if I choose wrong? You already did." I walked out into the snowy Brooklyn night, leaving behind the last illusions I had about the family I thought I belonged to. My car was cold, my hands were shaking, and my heart was broken. But for the first time in years, I felt free. The drive home through empty Christmas streets gave me time to absorb what had just happened. I had finally said everything I needed to say. I had finally chosen dignity over desperation. It felt like surgery, painful but necessary. Devastating, but ultimately healing. When I reached my apartment, I made a cup of tea and sat by my window, watching snow fall on Brooklyn like forgiveness from the sky. My phone was already ringing. David, Rebecca, probably Eleanor too. But I didn't answer. There was nothing left to discuss. I had spent years trying to buy love that was never for sale, trying to earn respect from people who had decided I wasn't worthy of it. Trying to maintain relationships that had become transactions. Tonight, I had finally stopped pretending that was enough. For the first time in decades, Christmas night passed in peaceful silence. No drama, no walking on eggshells, no pretending to be grateful for crumbs of affection, just quietude and the strange relief of having finally told the truth. But just when I thought the ordeal was over, life delivered one more test. 3 days after Christmas, I woke up to find my phone buzzing with notifications. Dozens of them, all from social media platforms I barely used. With a growing sense of dread, I opened the applications to discover that a video had gone viral. A video of me. Someone had recorded my confrontation at Christmas dinner, though I never saw anyone holding a phone. The video showed me tearing the photograph and making my declarations about changing my will, but it had been edited to start after David's real family comment. Without that context, I looked like an unhinged old woman destroying family mementos and threatening relatives over some minor disagreement. The caption read, "Entitled Grandmother Threatens Family Over Christmas Dinner. This is what happens when elderly people become bitter and jealous of their children's happiness." The comments were brutal. Hundreds of strangers were calling me greedy, manipulative, a bitter old hag who couldn't stand to see her son happy. People were sharing stories of their own toxic elderly relatives, using my pain as entertainment and validation for their own family conflicts. But worse than the strangers' comments were the carefully crafted responses from my own family members. Rebecca had posted a long, weepy testimony about how hard they had tried to include me, how generous Eleanor had been, how heartbroken they all were that I had chosen to destroy the family over money. David had shared the video with his own caption, "Sometimes you have to protect your children from toxic behavior, even when it comes from family. Grateful for the real family who shows us what love looks like." Eleanor, playing the victim perfectly, had written about how devastating it was to be attacked by someone she had tried so hard to help and support. They had turned me into the villain in my own story, using carefully edited footage and emotional manipulation to paint themselves as the injured parties. The public humiliation was complete. I sat in my apartment, watching strangers tear apart my character based on a deliberately misleading video, and felt something harden inside my chest. This was their final move. Not content with stealing from me and erasing me from their lives, they needed to destroy my reputation as well. But something interesting happened as I scrolled through the comments. Mixed in with the vitriol were other voices. People who recognized the signs of elder abuse, who understood that there was more to this story than what the video showed. A few commenters pointed out the suspicious editing, the lack of context, the coordinated responses from family members that felt too rehearsed to be genuine. "This feels like a setup," wrote one user. "Why was someone recording a private family dinner? Why does the video start in the middle of the conversation? Something doesn't smell right here." Another comment caught my attention. "I work with elderly clients who've been financially abused by their families. This woman's reaction suggests years of accumulated pain, not sudden greed. The family's immediate media response feels calculated and cruel." Reading those comments, I realized that while my family had succeeded in humiliating me publicly, they had also revealed themselves. Their coordinated attack, the perfectly edited video, the immediate social media campaign, it all felt too professional, too planned to be a spontaneous response to my Christmas night outburst. Rosa knocked on my door that afternoon, having seen the video through her own social media connections. "Margaret, honey, are you okay?" I let her in and showed her my phone, scrolling through hundreds of comments from people who didn't know me but felt qualified to judge my entire character based on 90 seconds of edited footage. "This is sick," Rosa said after watching the video. "They planned this. Someone was recording you deliberately, hoping you'd finally break so they could use it against you." The realization hit me like cold water. The Christmas dinner invitation, the careful seating arrangement, the deliberate provocations, the photo placement. It had all been designed to push me to a breaking point in front of a hidden camera. They had orchestrated my humiliation as carefully as they had orchestrated my financial exploitation. But instead of feeling devastated, I felt something unexpected. Relief. They had shown their true colors so clearly, so publicly, that I could never again doubt my decision to cut them from my life. Anyone willing to plan and execute such a cruel betrayal was someone I needed to escape from, not reconcile with. I called Maria Santos and told her about the video. Her response was immediate and reassuring. "This is actually evidence of harassment and emotional manipulation. We can use this in our legal case. They've just demonstrated their character publicly. But everyone thinks I'm a terrible person now. Margaret, do you care what strangers think more than you care about protecting yourself from people who would do this to their own family member?" She was right. The opinions of people who would judge an elderly woman based on 90 seconds of context-free video were not opinions I needed to value. What mattered was that I had finally seen my situation clearly and taken action to protect myself. Over the next few weeks, the social media storm gradually died down, replaced by newer scandals and fresh outrage. But the legal process continued. Maria's team had uncovered even more evidence of financial manipulation than I had known about, including evidence that Eleanor had been systematically coaching David and Rebecca on how to extract maximum financial benefit from our relationship. "Your family has been treating you like a mark in a long-term con game," Maria explained during one of our meetings. "The good news is that they documented much of their planning in emails and text messages. The bad news is that this level of premeditation makes their actions even more morally reprehensible." I listened to her explain how my money had been diverted, how my trust fund had been manipulated, how even my small gifts and contributions had been redirected toward Eleanor's benefit. and I felt something that might have been gratitude. Gratitude that I had finally learned the truth, no matter how painful it was. February brought legal resolution. Eleanor, David, and Rebecca were required to return the trust fund money. All of it, plus interest and penalties. They were also required to pay my legal fees and could face criminal charges if they attempted any further financial manipulation. The total settlement was $197,000. Money that had been stolen from me over the course of 3 years through various schemes and lies. Seeing that number written on legal documents was both vindicating and heartbreaking. Vindication that my intuition about being exploited had been correct. Heartbreaking that people I loved had been so systematically cruel. But more important than the money was the legal protection. New documents were filed ensuring that David had no access to my assets, no say in my medical decisions, and no claim to any future inheritance. I was legally protected from further exploitation. The day the settlement was finalized, I did something unprecedented. I booked a trip. Not a family visit or an obligation, but a purely selfish week in Savannah, Georgia, staying in a historical bed and breakfast and taking painting classes. Rosa had enrolled in watercolor classes at the Brooklyn Community Center, and she had been encouraging me to join her. You need something that's just for you, Margaret. Something that has nothing to do with being a mother or grandmother or anyone's helper. Just something that makes you happy. I had dismissed the idea for months. I'm not artistic, I had told her. I don't have time for hobbies. I can't afford to spend money on frivolous things. But all of those excuses had evaporated along with my obligation to fund other people's lives. I had time because I was no longer at everyone's beck and call. I could afford it because I was no longer paying for other people's renovations and vacations. And I didn't need to be naturally artistic to enjoy the process of creating something with my own hands. My first painting was terrible. A lopsided vase of flowers that looked more like colorful mushrooms. But holding the brush, mixing colors on the palette, watching images emerge from blank paper, it felt like meditation. For the first time in years, I was doing something purely for my own enjoyment, with no audience to please and no expectations to meet. Rosa and I became regular painting partners, spending Tuesday evenings in the community center art room, chatting quietly while we worked on projects that would never win awards, but gave us something that had been missing from our lives: pure, uncomplicated joy. The painting classes led to other discoveries. I started walking in Prospect Park every morning, not for exercise but for the pleasure of watching seasons change and seasons change. I began reading books I had put off for years, novels and memoirs that had nothing to do with self-help or family dynamics or financial planning. I redecorated my apartment, not because it needed updating, but because I wanted to live in spaces that reflected my taste rather than accommodating everyone else's comfort. I bought soft throw pillows in colors I loved, hung artwork that made me smile, replaced the worn furniture that had been good enough for years. Most surprisingly, I started volunteering at a local senior center, helping elderly residents who were being financially exploited by family members. My experience had given me a strange expertise, and I found deep satisfaction in helping other people recognize the warning signs I had ignored for so long. "You saved my life," one woman told me after I helped her understand that her son's constant financial emergencies were actually systematic theft. I thought I was going crazy, thinking bad things about my own child. Helping other people navigate similar betrayals helped me process my own experience. I wasn't crazy, paranoid, or selfish. I had been the victim of a calculated campaign of exploitation disguised as family love. Understanding that intellectually was different from feeling it emotionally, and the volunteer work helped bridge that gap. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came an unexpected phone call. "Tommy." "Grandma Margaret? It's me." My heart leaped at the sound of his voice, now deeper and more mature than it had been at Christmas. "Tommy, how are you, sweetheart?" "I'm okay. I wanted to call you. I'm sorry about what happened at Christmas. I didn't understand what was going on, but I know it made you really sad." "Oh, honey, you don't have anything to apologize for. You were caught in the middle of adult problems that had nothing to do with you. Dad said you don't want to see us anymore because you're angry about money, but that doesn't sound like the grandma I remember." I closed my eyes, wondering how to explain complex adult betrayals to a 13-year-old boy without poisoning his relationship with his parents. Tommy, I'm not angry. I'm protecting myself from people who were hurting me. Sometimes even people we love can treat us badly, and when that happens, we have to make hard choices. But you still love me, right? More than anything in the world, sweetheart. That will never change. Can I come see you sometime? Even if Dad says no? The question broke my heart and filled it simultaneously. This child, navigating the aftermath of adult conflicts, was trying to maintain a relationship with me despite family pressure. Tommy, I would love to see you, but I need you to talk to your parents first. I don't want to cause more problems for you at home. They don't have to know. I could take the subway after school sometimes, just for an hour. The idea of secret visits was tempting, but I knew it would ultimately hurt Tommy more than it would help either of us. Sweetheart, I appreciate that you want to see me, but I can't ask you to lie to your parents. When you're older, when you can make your own decisions about relationships, I'll be here. I'll always be here. We talked for another 20 minutes, carefully avoiding the topics that had torn our family apart. Tommy told me about school, his friends, a girl he had a crush on. I told him about my painting classes and my trip to Savannah. For a brief time, we were just grandmother and grandson again, connected by love instead of divided by loyalty. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my transformed apartment, surrounded by evidence of my new life. Fresh flowers on the table, paintings I had created hanging on the walls, books stacked beside my comfortable reading chair. The afternoon light streamed through windows I had cleaned myself, illuminating a space that finally felt like home instead of a waiting room. My phone didn't ring constantly anymore. My calendar wasn't packed with obligations and emergencies and other people's priorities. My bank account wasn't being systematically drained by relatives who saw my love as opportunity. For the first time in decades, my life was my own. Summer arrived with an invitation I never expected. Tommy's baseball team was playing in a tournament at a park near my neighborhood, and he had somehow arranged for me to receive a schedule. It wasn't a direct invitation. That probably would have caused family drama, but it was a message. If I happened to be at the park on Saturday afternoon, I might see my grandson play ball. I almost didn't go. The risk of encountering David and Rebecca felt enormous, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that confrontation. But the chance to see Tommy, to watch him do something he loved, was too precious to pass up. I sat in the bleachers wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, hoping to blend in with the crowd of parents and grandparents. Tommy was playing shortstop, and he was good. Quick hands, confident throws, focused concentration. I watched him field ground balls and cheer for his teammates, and my heart swelled with pride and love. Between innings, he scanned the crowd until his eyes found mine. He didn't wave or acknowledge me directly, but he smiled. A quick, secret smile that said he knew I was there and was glad. David and Rebecca were sitting on the other side of the bleachers with Eleanor, all of them focused on the game. I could have left without them noticing me, should have left to avoid potential drama. But something made me stay, some need to witness this piece of Tommy's life that had nothing to do with family conflict. It wasn't until after the game, when Tommy was collecting his equipment, that David spotted me. I watched his face cycle through surprise, anger, and something that might have been guilt. He said something to Rebecca, who immediately began scanning the crowd until she found me. For a moment, we stared at each other across the baseball diamond. The family I used to belong to, and the woman I had become. Tommy was walking toward the parking lot with his team, but he glanced back at me one more time with that same secret smile. Then I left, walking quickly toward my car before anyone could decide to confront me or make a scene at their son's baseball game. But as I drove home, I realized something profound had just happened. I had seen Tommy in his own element, doing something he loved, and I had been present for it even if I couldn't be fully included. That was enough. It had to be enough. August brought another milestone, my first solo vacation in 30 years. I flew to Santa Fe, New Mexico, rented a small casita, and spent a week painting landscapes and exploring art galleries. I ate meals when I was hungry without consulting anyone else's schedule. I took afternoon naps because I felt like it. I bought a piece of pottery simply because it was beautiful and I wanted to look at it every day. On my last night in Santa Fe, I sat on the Casita's small patio with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I was learning to recreate with watercolors. My phone was turned off. My responsibilities were thousands of miles away, and I was completely, utterly alone. It was the most peaceful I had been in years. Flying home to Brooklyn, I realized that I had discovered something I never knew I was missing. Solitude that felt like gift instead of punishment. For decades, being alone had meant being abandoned, forgotten, discarded. But this week, solitude had meant freedom, choice, self-determination. I wanted more of it. Fall arrived with changes I never could have imagined. Rosa and I decided to take a pottery class together, expanding our artistic horizons beyond painting. The community center had started a senior hiking group that met every Wednesday to explore different parks around the city. I joined a book club at the local library, where we discussed novels and memoirs and definitely did not psychoanalyze our family relationships. My calendar was full again, but this time with activities I had chosen, people I enjoyed, experiences that fed my soul instead of draining it. I was busier than I had been in years, but I was busy with my own life instead of the supporting role in someone else's drama. The legal settlement had been invested in a diversified portfolio that would provide steady income for the rest of my life. I would never be wealthy, but I would never again be financially insecure or dependent on family members who might decide my needs were less important than their wants. More importantly, I had learned to say no without guilt, to choose myself without shame, to value my own peace over other people's approval. These were skills I should have developed decades earlier, but better late than never. October brought an unexpected encounter. I was grocery shopping at the Whole Foods near my apartment when I rounded the corner and nearly collided with Rebecca. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both obviously surprised and unsure how to react. "Margaret," she said finally. "How are you?" "I'm well, Rebecca. How are you and Tommy?" "We're fine. Tommy's doing well in school. He made the varsity soccer team." "That's wonderful. Please tell him I'm proud of him." We stood there in the produce section, surrounded by organic apples and artisanal lettuce. Two women who used to be family trying to navigate a conversation that felt like crossing a minefield. "Margaret, I want you to know that we never wanted things to end this way. If you ever want to work things out how, Rebecca? By pretending that stealing from me was acceptable? By agreeing that I deserved to be erased from family decisions and family photos? By accepting that my role was to fund your lifestyle while being grateful for whatever scraps of attention you decided to offer?" She flushed, looking around to see if anyone was listening to our conversation. "It wasn't like that, and you know it. Eleanor was just trying to help, and you made everything into a competition. Eleanor was trying to help herself to my money, Rebecca, and she succeeded admirably. You got your money back. Isn't that enough? Do you really want to miss watching Tommy grow up over this?" The question was designed to manipulate me, and 6 months earlier it might have worked. But something had changed in me during this year of recovery. "Rebecca, I'll ask you the same question I asked David. Do you respect me?" She looked confused. "Of course I respect you. Do you respect me enough to admit that what happened was wrong? Do you respect me enough to take responsibility for the lies and the theft and the systematic campaign to erase me from this family? Do you respect me enough to offer a genuine apology instead of trying to convince me that I'm the problem?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, she shook her head. "I don't know what you want me to say, Margaret. We were trying to help Eleanor, and she's family too. I'm sorry you felt left out, but that was never our intention. I'm sorry you felt left out. Not, I'm sorry we left you out. Or, I'm sorry we hurt you. Or, I'm sorry we stole from you. I'm sorry you felt. As if the problem was my perception, not their actions. Thank you for answering my question, Rebecca," I said quietly. "Give Tommy my love." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the produce section looking puzzled and frustrated. As I finished my shopping, I realized that the encounter had been a gift. It had reminded me exactly why I had made the choices I'd made, and it had proven that nothing had changed in their fundamental approach to our relationship. They still saw me as the problem. They still refused to take responsibility for their actions. They still believed that I should be grateful for crumbs and ashamed of wanting more. But I was no longer the woman who would accept that dynamic. I had learned my worth, and it was non-negotiable. November arrived with the first anniversary of my awakening, the day I had discovered the truth about the trust fund manipulation and decided to reclaim my life. I marked the date by doing something I never could have imagined a year earlier. I threw myself a party. Not a birthday party or holiday celebration, but a Margaret appreciation party in my transformed apartment. I invited Rosa, my hiking group friends, my book club members, and my pottery classmates. I cooked foods I loved, played music that made me happy, and celebrated the person I had become over the past year. A year ago, I was a different person, I told my gathered friends as we raised our glasses in a toast. I was someone who confused being used with being loved, who mistook manipulation for family devotion, who believed my worth was determined by my usefulness to other people. Tonight, I'm celebrating the woman who finally learned better. The applause was warm and genuine, coming from people who valued me for my company, my humor, my perspectives on life. These were relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not financial transaction or family obligation. As my friends shared stories and laughter in my living room, I looked around at the life I had built from the ashes of family betrayal. It wasn't the life I had planned or expected, but it was mine in a way that nothing had been mine for decades. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my reading chair with a cup of tea and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I had been desperate, lonely, and broke from funding other people's lives. Tonight, I was surrounded by evidence of my own choices. Books I had selected, art I had created, furniture I had bought because it made me happy. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't an empty quiet anymore. It was a peaceful quiet, the silence of contentment rather than abandonment. December arrived with an unexpected gift. A letter from Tommy, not a call or text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered by mail. "Dear Grandma Margaret," it began, and my heart immediately started racing. "I know I'm not supposed to contact you, and I know there's a lot of grown-up stuff I don't understand about what happened with our family, but I wanted you to know that I think about you all the time, and I miss you." The letter was 3 pages long, written in his careful teenage handwriting. He told me about school, about the girl he had finally worked up the courage to ask to the winter dance, about the book he was reading for English class that he thought I would enjoy. He told me about missing our conversations and wishing he could show me the pottery he was making in art class. "I know Dad and Mom are mad at you about money stuff," he wrote, "but the grandma I remember would never be mean or greedy about money. The grandma I remember taught me that kindness was more important than having things, and that family was supposed to take care of each other. I don't know what really happened, but I know I still love you, and I hope you still love me too." I cried, reading that letter, not from sadness but from overwhelming gratitude. This boy, navigating family loyalty and his own moral compass, had reached the conclusion that love was more important than taking sides. He had remembered who I really was, despite the narrative being constructed around him. I wrote him back immediately, a long letter full of love and encouragement and carefully worded wisdom. I told him I was proud of him for thinking independently, for maintaining relationships despite pressure, for choosing love over loyalty to any particular version of events. But I also told him something important. "Tommy, I need you to know that whatever happens with the adults in our family, you are not responsible for fixing it or choosing sides or carrying messages between people who aren't speaking to each other. Your job is to be 13 years old, to do well in school, to enjoy your friends, and to become the person you want to be. The grown-ups will figure out their own problems eventually." Mailing that letter felt like placing a message in a bottle and casting it into the ocean, hoping it would reach its intended destination safely. 2 weeks later, I received another letter from Tommy, this one shorter, but just as precious. "Thank you for telling me it's okay to just be a kid. Sometimes I feel like I'm supposed to fix everything, and it's nice to know that's not my job. I love you, Grandma. Merry Christmas." Christmas Eve arrived gray and quiet, the first anniversary of the confrontation that had changed everything. Instead of feeling sad about spending the holiday alone, I felt something approaching gratitude. A year ago, I had been sitting at Eleanor's table being systematically humiliated. Tonight, I was in my own space, surrounded by evidence of a life lived on my own terms. Rosa had invited me to spend Christmas with her family again, and I had accepted gratefully. But Christmas Eve was mine to spend however I wanted, and what I wanted was quietude and reflection. I made myself a simple dinner, opened a bottle of wine I had been saving, and sat by my window watching snow fall on Brooklyn streets. The city looked peaceful under its blanket of white, and I felt peaceful too. My phone rang once, David's number showing on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, wondering what he might want to say on this anniversary of our family's explosion, but I didn't answer. Whatever words he had for me, I wasn't ready to hear them, and I might never be. The voicemail he left was brief and awkward. "Mom, it's David. I know it's Christmas Eve, and I know things are complicated between us. I just wanted to say, I hope you're doing okay. I hope you have a good Christmas." No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no invitation to repair our relationship. Just a perfunctory holiday greeting that somehow managed to sound both guilty and defensive. I deleted the message without saving it. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the snow from the night before sparkling like diamonds in the winter sunlight. I made coffee and sat with my art supplies, painting a winter landscape visible from my window. The brushstrokes felt meditative, each color choice a small act of creation and self-expression. By noon, I was at Rosa's house, surrounded by the warm chaos of a family that actually enjoyed each other's company. 3 generations of her family gathered around a table laden with food, sharing stories and jokes and genuine affection that didn't come with strings attached. "Margaret, we're so glad you're here," Rosa's daughter Carmen said as she set another place at the table. "Mom talks about you all the time. She says you're the strongest woman she knows." Strongest woman she knows. A year ago, I would have laughed at that description. I had felt weak, desperate, pathetic in my need for family approval. But sitting at Rosa's table, looking back on the year that had transformed my life, I could see the strength that had been building slowly, quietly, beneath the surface of my desperation. It had taken strength to finally acknowledge what was happening to me. It had taken strength to hire a lawyer and fight for what was rightfully mine. It had taken strength to walk away from people I loved who didn't love me back. It had taken strength to build a new life from scratch at 70 years old. Maybe I was stronger than I had realized. After dinner, Rosa and I took a walk through the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, which stayed open for a special Christmas afternoon program. The winter garden was stark but beautiful, bare branches creating intricate patterns against the pale sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Rosa asked as we walked past dormant flower beds that would bloom again in spring. "Walking away from your family?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "I regret that they made choices that forced me to choose between my dignity and my family relationships. But I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret refusing to fund my own abuse. I don't regret learning my worth. And Tommy? Tommy is the hardest part. But I've realized that the best thing I can do for Tommy is to model self-respect. If I had continued accepting unacceptable treatment, what would that have taught him about how to treat people? What would it have taught him about what he should accept from others?" Rosa nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother used to say that sometimes love means letting go. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much to participate in something toxic. Sometimes love means letting go." The words resonated in my chest like a bell ringing. I had spent so many years trying to hold on to relationships that were hurting me, believing that my persistence would somehow transform indifference into love, manipulation into genuine care. But maybe the most loving thing I could do, for them and for myself, was to stop participating in a dynamic that brought out the worst in all of us. As we walked back toward Rosa's house through the gathering dusk, I realized that this Christmas had been everything the previous year's disaster had not been. Peaceful, genuine, filled with people who wanted me there rather than people who tolerated my presence. I had lost a family, but I had gained a life. The trade-off was painful, but ultimately worthwhile. January brought an unexpected opportunity. The senior center where I volunteered was starting a support group for elderly people who had experienced financial abuse from family members, and they asked me to help facilitate it. You have a unique perspective, the center director explained. You've been where these people are, but you've also successfully extracted yourself from the situation. You can offer both empathy and hope. The first meeting drew 8 people, mostly women in their 60s and 70s, all carrying variations of the same story. Children who had gradually gained access to their finances, grandchildren used as emotional leverage, subtle campaigns to isolate them from other family members while maximizing their financial contributions. Listening to their stories was like looking into a mirror that reflected my own experience back at me from different angles. The details varied, but the patterns were remarkably consistent. The gradual erosion of boundaries, the confusion between being needed and being loved, the fear that setting limits would mean losing family entirely. I keep thinking maybe I'm wrong, said Eleanor, ironically sharing the name of my own family's manipulator. Maybe I'm being too sensitive, too suspicious. These are my children. They love me. Love doesn't steal, I said gently. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't manipulate or gaslight or systematically exclude you from decisions about your own money or your own grandchildren. The room was quiet as my words sank in. These were truths none of us had wanted to face, but they were truths nonetheless. Over the following weeks, I watched these women, and 2 men, begin to recognize patterns they had been trained to ignore. I watched them struggle with the same fears that had paralyzed me. The terror of loneliness, the shame of admitting they had been victimized by people they loved, the difficulty of distinguishing between family loyalty and self-destruction. Facilitating that group became one of the most meaningful activities of my new life. Every person who found the courage to set boundaries, every person who stopped funding their own abuse, every person who chose dignity over desperation felt like a victory not just for them, but for everyone who had ever been trapped in similar dynamics. Spring arrived early again, and with it came a surprising phone call. Maria Santos, my lawyer, had news. Margaret, I wanted you to know that we've been contacted by David's attorney. He wants to discuss some kind of reconciliation. My stomach tightened. What kind of reconciliation? He's being vague about details, but he's implied that the family wants to move past what happened and rebuild their relationship with you. He's also mentioned that they understand you might have conditions. I was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected development. Maria, what do you think this is really about? Honestly, I think they've realized that cutting you out of their lives had more consequences than they anticipated. Maybe they're feeling social pressure from people who saw the legal proceedings. Maybe they're facing financial pressures without your contributions. Maybe Tommy has been pushing for reconciliation. It's hard to say without more information. What kind of conditions might they be expecting? Probably that you would agree not to pursue any further legal action, that you would resume some level of financial support, that you would publicly forgive what happened and present a united family front. The usual requests from people who want absolution without accountability. The idea of reconciliation was simultaneously appealing and terrifying. Part of me still missed the family I thought I had belonged to, still longed for relationships with David and Tommy that weren't mediated by lawyers and conflict. But a larger part of me had learned too much about their character to trust that any reconciliation would be genuine. What do you recommend, Maria? I recommend that you think very carefully about what you would need from them before you would consider rebuilding a relationship. And I recommend that you be prepared for the possibility that they can't or won't meet those requirements. That night, I sat in my reading chair with a notebook, trying to articulate what genuine reconciliation would look like. Not the surface-level peace they were probably offering, but the deep repair that would be necessary for me to trust them again. My list was short, but non-negotiable. A genuine apology that acknowledged the full scope of what had happened. The lies, the theft, the manipulation, the systematic exclusion, the public humiliation. Not a fake apology that blamed me for misunderstanding their intentions, but recognition that their actions had been wrong, regardless of their motivations. Complete financial transparency and accountability. I would need to see exactly where every dollar had gone, how it had been used, and how they planned to prevent similar situations in the future. Their financial decisions would need to be open books, not state secrets. Respect for my autonomy and boundaries. No more assumptions about my availability, my resources, or my obligations. No more guilt trips or manipulation designed to extract compliance or contributions. An end to Eleanor's influence in our family dynamics. She had been the architect of much of what had happened, and any genuine reconciliation would require acknowledgement of her role and limits on her future access to family decisions. Evidence of changed behavior over time. Words would no longer be enough. I would need to see consistent, sustained changes in how they treated me and talked about me before I could consider trusting them again. Looking at my list, I realized that what I was describing wasn't just reconciliation. It was a complete transformation of our family dynamic. And transformation of that magnitude typically required the kind of deep self-reflection and behavior change that most people were unwilling to undertake. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe the legal consequences had been a wake-up call. Maybe they had spent the past months examining their choices and recognizing the damage they had caused. Maybe they were ready to do the hard work of earning back my trust. Or maybe this was another manipulation, another attempt to restore access to my resources and my unconditional forgiveness without accepting responsibility for what they had done. There was only one way to find out. I called Maria the next morning, set up a meeting, but I want it in your office, with you present, and I want it recorded. If they're serious about reconciliation, they'll agree to those conditions. Through her attorney, David agreed to the meeting but pushed back on having it recorded. That was my first red flag. People who were genuinely sorry and genuinely committed to change didn't typically object to having their words documented. We compromised. The meeting would take place in Maria's office with her present, but we wouldn't record it unless both parties agreed. I suspected they would never agree, which would tell me everything I needed to know about their sincerity. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in late April. I spent the morning in the Botanic Garden, walking among the spring flowers and centering myself for what was likely to be an emotionally intense conversation. I arrived at Maria's office 15 minutes early, wearing a simple blue dress and the pearl earrings my mother had given me, armor disguised as jewelry. David arrived exactly on time, accompanied by an attorney I didn't recognize, and to my surprise, Rebecca. We sat across from each other in Maria's conference room, 2 years and a chasm of betrayal between us. David looked older, more tired than I remembered. Rebecca avoided eye contact, focusing on the papers in front of her attorney. "Mrs. Walsh," David's attorney began, "my clients want you to know that they regret the misunderstandings that occurred and the pain that resulted from those misunderstandings. They're hoping to find a path forward that allows this family to heal." Misunderstandings. The word hit me like a slap. Not theft or betrayal or systematic financial abuse, but misunderstandings, as if I had simply misinterpreted their benevolent intentions. "Mr. Peterson," I replied, addressing the attorney directly, "what exactly do your clients believe I misunderstood?" David leaned forward. "Mom, I think you know that we never intended to hurt you. Eleanor was just trying to help manage things more efficiently, and some of the communication around those changes could have been better. We realize now that you felt excluded, and we're sorry about that. I felt excluded. Not we excluded you, but you felt excluded." The same defensive language Rebecca had used in the grocery store, designed to make me responsible for my own pain. "David, I'd like you to explain to me what happened with Tommy's college trust fund. Walk me through those decisions and who made them." He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, that's complex financial stuff. Eleanor had some suggestions about investment strategies that would benefit Tommy in the long run, and we thought it made sense to consolidate management under someone with more experience. Without consulting me about my money for my grandson, we were going to discuss it with you once everything was set up. You were going to present me with a fait accompli and ask me to approve decisions that had already been made without my input. It wasn't like that, Mom." I looked to Rebecca. "Rebecca, do you remember the email where you and Eleanor discussed my being too emotional about money to be included in investment decisions?" Rebecca's face flushed. "Margaret, that was taken out of context. We weren't trying to exclude you maliciously." "How should I have interpreted it, Rebecca? In what context is it acceptable to describe someone as too emotional to handle their own money while secretly redirecting that money for other people's benefit. The room fell quiet. I could see David's attorney taking notes, probably advising his clients that this was not going as planned. Mrs. Walsh, the attorney interjected, my clients acknowledge that there were communication failures and some decisions that, in hindsight, should have been made differently. They're prepared to offer certain assurances about future transparency and inclusion in family financial matters. What kind of assurances? They would commit to consulting you about any decisions involving funds you've contributed or trust funds established for Tommy's benefit. They would also commit to more regular communication and inclusion in family activities. I almost laughed. They would commit to consulting me about my own money and including me in my own family. These weren't concessions. They were basic human dignity being offered like generous gifts. And what would they expect from me in return for these assurances? David's attorney glanced at his clients before answering. They would hope that you might consider resuming some level of financial support for Tommy's education and other family needs. Nothing like the previous amounts, just a reasonable contribution that reflects your desire to be part of Tommy's future. There it was. The real purpose of this meeting. They wanted my money again, and they were willing to offer minimal behavioral changes to get it. David, I said, looking directly at my son, do you believe that what happened to me was wrong? Not poorly communicated or misunderstood, but actually wrong. He looked at his attorney, then at Rebecca, then back at me. Mom, I think we all made mistakes during a stressful time. I think there were failures on both sides, and I think we need to focus on moving forward rather than relitigating the past. Failures on both sides. My failure, apparently, had been objecting to being stolen from. My failure had been expecting honesty from my own family. My failure had been wanting to be treated with basic respect and dignity. I stood up. Maria, I believe this meeting is over. Mrs. Walsh, please, David's attorney said quickly. Perhaps we can discuss specific terms that would address your concerns. I turned to face David one more time. Do you love me, David? The question clearly surprised him. Of course I love you, Mom. You're my mother. Do you respect me? Longer pause. Yes, of course I respect you. Do you trust me? He hesitated. Mom, trust is something we build over time. I think we need to rebuild trust on both sides. I need to rebuild your trust in me? What exactly have I done that damaged your trust? You hired lawyers, Mom. You took legal action against your own family. That felt like an attack. I hired lawyers to stop you from stealing from me, David. I took legal action to protect myself from people who were systematically exploiting me while lying to my face. If that felt like an attack, perhaps you should examine why protecting myself threatened you. I gathered my purse and looked at this man who used to be my little boy, this woman who used to call me a second mother, these lawyers who were trying to negotiate my return to victim status. Here's what I learned over the past year and a half, I said. I learned that I don't have to accept unacceptable treatment from anyone, even family. I learned that love without respect is just manipulation with prettier words. I learned that I deserve relationships based on genuine care rather than financial transaction. I walked toward the door, then turned back one more time. David, if you ever decide you want to actually apologize, not for misunderstandings or communication failures, but for lying to me, stealing from me, and systematically excluding me from my own family, you know how to find me. But I won't be funding anyone's lifestyle while I wait for that apology. I left them sitting in that conference room, probably strategizing their next approach or making excuses for why the meeting hadn't gone as planned. But I walked out feeling clean and clear and proud of myself for not accepting crumbs disguised as feast. That evening, I sat in my garden. I had started container gardening on my small balcony and reflected on the day. I had hoped, despite everything, that they might surprise me. I had hoped they might have used this time to genuinely examine their behavior and find some authentic remorse. But they hadn't changed. They had simply tried new strategies for getting what they had always wanted, access to my resources without accountability for their actions. The meeting had been a job interview for the position of family ATM, not an attempt at genuine reconciliation. I felt sad, but I also felt relieved. The door was definitively closed now. not because I had slammed it shut, but because they had chosen not to walk through it when it was offered to them. Summer arrived with new adventures. I had signed up for a senior travel group that was taking a trip to Italy in September, my first international travel in over a decade. I was also planning to visit Tommy's next baseball tournament, not in secret this time, but openly, as his grandmother, who had every right to watch him play. The travel group met monthly to plan our itinerary and get to know each other. 15 people, all over 60, all excited about exploring Florence and Rome and Venice together. They were widows and divorcees, and people like me who had simply decided it was time to start living for themselves instead of for other people's approval. "What made you decide to join us, Margaret?" asked Helen, a woman who had lost her husband 2 years earlier and was tired of waiting for her adult children to include her in their busy lives. "I realized I had been waiting for other people's permission to live my own life," I said. "I decided to stop waiting." The Italy trip became a symbol of everything I had gained by choosing myself over toxic family dynamics. Adventure, new experiences, relationships based on mutual interest rather than obligation or manipulation. I was 71 years old, but I was just beginning to understand what it meant to be free. August brought another letter from Tommy, this one longer and more mature in its perspective. "Dear Grandma Margaret," he wrote, "I'm 15 now, and I understand more about what happened with our family. Dad says you chose lawyers over love, but I think maybe you chose self-respect over being treated badly. I don't know all the details, and maybe I don't need to know all the details. What I know is that you taught me to stand up for myself and to treat people with kindness, and those lessons didn't change just because the grown-ups in our family couldn't figure out how to get along." He told me about high school, about the girl he was dating, about his plans to study business in college. He told me he had gotten a part-time job and was saving money for a car. He sounded confident and thoughtful, like he was growing into someone I would be proud to know as an adult. "I hope someday the family stuff gets worked out," he concluded. "But even if it doesn't, I want you to know that you'll always be my grandmother, and I'll always love you. When I turn 18 and can make my own choices about relationships, I hope you'll still want to see me." I cried reading that letter, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sadness. This boy had navigated family conflict with more wisdom and integrity than any of the adults involved. He had somehow maintained his own moral compass despite the pressure to choose sides. I wrote him back immediately, telling him how proud I was of the person he was becoming, how much his letters meant to me, how I would always be there for him regardless of what happened with other family relationships. September arrived with my departure for Italy. At the airport, I stood in line with my passport and carry-on bag, surrounded by strangers who were about to become traveling companions. I felt nervous and excited and proud of myself for stepping so far outside my comfort zone. The trip was everything I had hoped for and more. I stood in the Uffizi Gallery looking at paintings I had only seen in books, walked through Roman ruins that were older than Christianity, took a gondola ride in Venice at sunset while eating gelato like a tourist with absolutely no shame about looking like a tourist. But more than the sights, I treasured the freedom of it all. Freedom to wake up whenever I wanted, eat whatever appealed to me, spend as much time as I wanted looking at things that interested me without worrying about anyone else's schedule or preferences or budget. One evening in Florence, I was sitting at a sidewalk cafe with Helen and 2 other women from our group, sharing a bottle of Chianti and watching the world walk by, when Helen said something that struck me profoundly. "You know what's funny?" she said. "I spent so many years worrying about being alone, and now that I actually am alone most of the time, I've discovered that I really enjoy my own company." I raised my glass. "To enjoying our own company," I said, and we all laughed and toasted to the radical concept of women our age choosing solitude over toxicity, adventure over obligation, self-respect over self-sacrifice. Flying home from Italy, I looked down at the Atlantic Ocean and realized that the woman who had left New York 2 weeks earlier was not quite the same as the woman who was returning. I had stepped fully into my independence, claimed my right to experiences and adventures, proved to myself that life at 71 could still hold surprises and joy and growth. I landed at JFK with a suitcase full of art books and pottery I had bought simply because it was beautiful, with a phone full of pictures of myself smiling in places I had never expected to see, with a heart full of confidence about the choices I had made. October brought an unexpected encounter that would test everything I had learned about boundaries and self-respect. I was at the grocery store when I turned a corner and nearly collided with Eleanor. For a moment, we just stared at each other. She looked older, less polished than I remembered, wearing a simple cardigan instead of her usual expensive outfits. "Margaret," she said finally. "How are you?" "I'm well, Eleanor. How are you?" "I'm managing." She seemed to struggle for words, which was unusual for someone who had always been so articulate in her manipulations. "Margaret, I know there's bad feelings between us, and I want you to know that I never intended for things to turn out this way." I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or calculated performance. "What way did you intend for things to turn out, Eleanor?" "I just wanted to help. David and Rebecca were struggling, and I thought I could provide some guidance, some additional resources. I never meant to exclude you or make you feel unwanted. You redirected my grandson's college fund into your personal accounts, Eleanor. You orchestrated a campaign to convince my son that I was too emotional and incompetent to be trusted with family financial decisions. You systematically erased me from family photos and gatherings while encouraging David and Rebecca to continue accepting my money. What part of that was intended to help me?" She flinched at my direct recitation of her actions. "It wasn't like that, Margaret. Things got complicated, and maybe some decisions weren't handled as well as they could have been, but my intentions were always to strengthen the family. Your intentions were to replace me in the family while continuing to benefit from my financial contributions. Your intentions were to position yourself as the competent matriarch while painting me as the difficult, jealous ex-mother-in-law who needed to be managed rather than respected." We stood there in the grocery aisle, two elderly women having a conversation that felt like a final accounting of a long war. "Margaret, I want you to know that I'm sorry you were hurt. I'm sorry the situation became so adversarial. I want you to know that I never disliked you personally." I almost laughed at the carefully crafted non-apology. She was sorry I was hurt, not sorry she had hurt me. She was sorry the situation became adversarial, not sorry she had created the adversarial situation. "Eleanor, do you understand what you did wrong?" She looked genuinely confused by the question. "I helped my daughter and her family navigate some complicated financial decisions. I provided guidance based on my experience. I don't understand why that's wrong. You stole from me, Eleanor. You lied to me. You manipulated my son into betraying his own mother. You orchestrated my exclusion from family decisions and family gatherings while encouraging everyone to continue accepting my money. You turned my generosity into a weapon against my own well-being." She shook her head. "Margaret, I think you're being very dramatic. Families help each other, and sometimes that means making difficult decisions about resource allocation and management responsibilities. I'm sorry if you felt left out of those processes. I felt left out. Not, I left you out, or we excluded you, but you felt left out, as if the problem was my perception rather than their deliberate actions. Eleanor, I want you to understand something very clearly. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not bitter or jealous or resentful. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you revealed your character so completely that I was able to see what kind of people I was dealing with. I'm grateful that your greed and manipulation finally became so obvious that I had no choice but to protect myself. I'm grateful that losing you and David and Rebecca forced me to build a life based on genuine relationships and authentic self-respect." Her face went through several emotions: surprise, confusion, what might have been hurt. "So, thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for lying to me so comprehensively that I finally stopped believing the lies. Thank you for stealing from me so systematically that I finally learned to protect my resources. Thank you for treating me so badly that I finally learned what good treatment looks like." I turned to walk away, then paused and looked back at her one more time. "And Eleanor, if you ever decide you want to make genuine amends, not just manage my feelings or restore access to my checkbook, but actually take responsibility for what you did and work to repair the damage you caused, you know how to find me, but I won't be holding my breath." I left her standing there looking stunned, probably trying to process how the conversation had gone so wrong from her perspective. She had likely expected me to be angry or bitter, which would have allowed her to paint me as the unreasonable, unforgiving ex-family member. Instead, I had thanked her for the education in manipulation and self-protection she had provided. Walking to my car, I realized that encounter had been another gift. It had shown me how completely I had healed from the damage these people had inflicted. I wasn't angry at Eleanor anymore. I wasn't hurt by her refusal to take responsibility. I wasn't hoping for some magical moment of recognition and remorse. I was simply done with all of them, and increasingly grateful for the life I had built in their absence. November brought the second anniversary of my awakening, and I celebrated again with another Margaret appreciation party. This time, the guest list was longer. Friends from my travel group, my pottery class, my book club, my hiking group. People I had met through volunteering. My small apartment was packed with people who genuinely enjoyed my company and valued my friendship. 2 years ago, I told my gathered friends as we raised our glasses, I thought I had lost everything that mattered. I thought losing my family meant losing my identity, my purpose, my future. Tonight, I can see that I didn't lose anything real. I gained everything that actually matters: self-respect, authentic relationships, and the freedom to live according to my own values instead of other people's expectations. The applause was warm and sustained, coming from people who had witnessed my transformation over the past 2 years. These were people who knew me not as David's mother or Tommy's other grandmother, but as Margaret, a woman with her own interests, opinions, humor, and worth. After everyone left that night, I sat in my reading chair with my journal, reflecting on everything that had changed since I first discovered the truth about the trust fund manipulation. I had lost a family, but I had found myself. I had lost financial security in some ways, but I had gained control over my own resources. I had lost the illusion of being loved, but I had discovered what genuine affection actually felt like. The apartment was quiet, but it was a satisfied quiet, the silence of contentment rather than emptiness. December arrived with another letter from Tommy, this one accompanied by something unexpected, a small package. "Dear Grandma Margaret," the letter began, "I'm 16 now, and I wanted to send you something I made in art class. It's not very good, but I thought you might like it because I know you're into pottery now." Inside the package was a small ceramic bowl, glazed in blue and green with slightly uneven walls that showed the marks of amateur hands, but also showed careful attention and genuine effort. It was beautiful not because of its technical perfection, but because it had been made with love by someone who was thinking of me. The letter continued, "I've been saving money from my job, and when I turn 18 in 2 years, I want to come visit you. I want to see your apartment and meet your friends and maybe take one of those pottery classes with you. I know the family stuff is complicated, and I know there are things I don't understand about what happened between you and Dad and Mom. But I also know that you're my grandmother and I love you, and those things don't change just because adults can't figure out how to get along." He told me about his girlfriend, about his plans for college, about the part-time job he had gotten at a local bookstore. He sounded confident and thoughtful, like he was growing into someone with his own moral compass and his own capacity for loyalty based on character rather than family obligation. "Sometimes I think about the things you used to tell me when I was little," he wrote, "about treating people with kindness and standing up for what's right, and not letting anyone convince you to be smaller than you are. I think maybe you had to follow your own advice when you decided to protect yourself from people who weren't treating you right. I think maybe that was brave instead of mean." I held that letter and that imperfect, beautiful ceramic bowl and wept tears of pure gratitude. This boy had somehow navigated years of family conflict and emerged with his integrity intact and his love undiminished. He had seen through the stories being told about me and reached his own conclusions based on the person he remembered me to be. Christmas Eve arrived again, the second anniversary of the confrontation that had changed everything. This time, instead of feeling sad about the losses, I felt celebratory about the gains. I had gained freedom, authenticity, self-respect, and relationships based on genuine mutual caring. I spent Christmas Eve with Rosa and her family again, and Christmas Day with my travel group friends at Helen's house. We cooked together, shared stories, exchanged simple gifts chosen with thought and care rather than obligation. It was the most peaceful, joyful Christmas I had experienced in years. As the year drew to a close, I found myself thinking often about the journey that had brought me here. 2 years ago, I had been a woman so desperate for family connection that I had allowed myself to be systematically exploited. Tonight, I was a woman who valued herself enough to walk away from people who didn't value her. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick or painless. I had grieved the loss of the family I thought I had, struggled with loneliness and doubt, questioned my decisions and my worth, but I had also discovered reserves of strength and resilience I didn't know I possessed. I had learned that solitude could be peaceful, rather than punishing, that authentic relationships were worth more than familiar manipulation, that self-respect was a gift I could give to myself regardless of how other people chose to treat me. New Year's Eve found me at a quiet party with my book club friends, playing board games and sharing champagne and making gentle resolutions for the year ahead. As midnight approached, Helen raised her glass for a toast. "To the women we've become," she said, "and to the courage it took to become them." I raised my glass along with the others, looking around at these women who had all found their way to authenticity through various paths of loss and discovery. "To choosing ourselves," I added, "not as selfishness, but as self-respect." The new year began with snow falling outside Helen's windows, covering Brooklyn in fresh white that made everything look clean and full of possibility. I thought about Tommy, now working toward his 18th birthday when he could make his own choices about relationships. I thought about David and Rebecca and Eleanor, probably still convinced that I was the problem, the bitter ex-family member who had chosen lawyers over love. But mostly, I thought about Margaret Walsh, the woman I had discovered beneath decades of people-pleasing and desperation for approval. She was stronger than I had known, braver than I had imagined, more worthy of love and respect than I had ever believed. At 72 years old, I was finally getting to know her, and I liked what I was learning. The years that followed brought continued growth and adventure. I took more classes, traveled to new places, deepened friendships with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. I continued facilitating support groups for elderly people experiencing family financial abuse, helping others recognize the patterns I had been so slow to see in my own life. Tommy did visit when he turned 18, spending a week with me during his summer break from high school. He was tall and confident and kind, with a moral compass that had somehow remained true despite the family chaos of his adolescence. We took pottery classes together, walked through the botanic garden, talked about his college plans and his hopes for the future. "Grandma," he said on his last evening with me, "I want you to know that I understand now why you had to protect yourself. I'm sorry it took so long for me to be old enough to make my own choices about staying in touch with you. You were never the problem, Tommy," I told him. "You were a child caught in an adult conflict. I never wanted you to feel responsible for fixing things that weren't your fault. I know that now. And I want you to know that when people ask me about our family situation, I tell them that sometimes love means having enough respect for someone to treat them well. And if you can't do that, then you don't really love them at all." He had learned the lesson I had tried to teach myself. Authentic love required authentic respect. Everything else was just transaction disguised with prettier words. David never did offer the genuine apology I had said I would be willing to hear. Eleanor never acknowledged what she had done or attempted real amends. Rebecca continued treating me like the problem, rather than the victim of the problems they had created. But their inability to take responsibility no longer affected my peace or my sense of self-worth. I had learned to value myself independently of their opinions, to find fulfillment in relationships that were built on mutual respect and care, to create a life that reflected my own values and interests rather than other people's expectations. On quiet evenings, I sit in my reading chair surrounded by books I've chosen, art I've created, and photographs from adventures I've taken. The apartment is filled with evidence of a life lived by my own design: pottery from classes with Rosa, paintings from my trips to Italy and Santa Fe, letters from Tommy carefully preserved in a special box. The silence in my home is no longer the silence of abandonment, but the silence of contentment. I know the difference now, and it makes all the difference in the world. If you're listening to this story and recognizing pieces of your own experience, if you're funding other people's lives while being excluded from their real affection, if you're accepting crumbs of attention while providing banquets of support, if you're confused about whether you're being loved or used, I want you to know that it's possible to choose differently. It won't be easy. It will require courage you may not know you have, strength you may need to develop, faith in your own worth that may feel revolutionary after years of accepting less than you deserve. But it's possible. I am living proof that it's possible to reclaim your dignity, rebuild your life, and discover authentic relationships even when it feels like you've lost everything that mattered. You don't have to fund your own abuse. You don't have to smile and pretend that manipulation is love. You don't have to be grateful for treatment that diminishes your worth and dignity. You can choose yourself, not as selfishness, but as self-respect. Not as giving up on love, but as finally understanding what love actually looks like. Have you ever found yourself questioning whether you're being loved or used? Have you ever wondered if family loyalty requires accepting unacceptable treatment? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you see your own situation more clearly, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue opening my heart and sharing these difficult but necessary truths with people who need to hear them. Remember, you deserve relationships based on genuine respect and care. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not just what you can provide. You deserve to choose yourself when others refuse to choose you. It's never too late to reclaim your worth. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to discover who you are when you stop trying to be what everyone else wants you to be. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are worth more than you know.